When did you realize your parents saw you as property rather than a person? I found out when I turned 21 and my father locked me in our basement for refusing to marry his 48-year-old business partner. I still remember that day perfectly. I'd just finished my 3rd year of university, came home for summer break. My father had been acting weird, kept talking about this amazing opportunity, how our family was finally going to move up in the world. I thought he meant some business deal. Turns out I was the business deal. Raphael showed up for dinner that night. I'd met him a few times before at my father's company events. Always gave me creepy vibes. The way he'd stare when he thought no one was looking. I never understood why my father was so insistent I attend those events until that night. We're halfway through dinner when my father starts talking about how Raphael has always admired me, how he'd make such a good provider, how lucky I was that such a successful man was interested in someone like me. I felt sick. Raphael just sat there smiling, like this was all normal. Then my father pulls out a box, tells me Raphael has asked for my hand in marriage and that he's given his blessing. I thought it was some sick joke at first. Looked at my mother who just stared at her plate. My brother Hayden wouldn't meet my eyes. I laughed, told them all to fuck off. That's when my father's face changed. I'd seen him angry before, but never like this. He told me I didn't have a choice. That Raphael was offering $2 million to merge our family businesses through marriage. I stood up, told him I wasn't for sale. Tried to leave the room, but Raphael grabbed my arm, said he'd been patient long enough, said my father had promised him. I panicked, grabbed the nearest thing, a wine glass, and smashed it against his face. Everything after that happened so fast. My father completely lost it. Started screaming about how I'd ruined everything, how I was nothing but an ungrateful bitch who didn't understand the sacrifices he'd made. Raphael was bleeding, saying something about taming me, and my mother was just crying in the corner. I tried to run, but my father caught me, dragged me downstairs to our basement. It was finished, had a bathroom, but no windows. We used to use it as a rec room before my father converted it to store his collectibles. He threw me inside, said I could come out when I was ready to apologize and accept my responsibility to this family. I heard the lock click, screamed until my throat was raw. No one came. Spent the first hours banging on the door, begging to be let out. My phone was upstairs. No way to call for help. I kept thinking this can't be real. They can't just keep me here. Someone will realize this is insane. But nobody came. I could hear them moving around upstairs. Heard Raphael's voice the next morning, still there, talking with my father, like nothing was wrong. Like the daughter of the house wasn't locked in the basement. My mother slipped some food under the door that evening. I begged her to let me out. She just whispered that I needed to cooperate. That my father had invested everything in this deal. That our family would be ruined if I didn't agree. When I asked how she could let this happen to her own daughter, she said sometimes women have to make sacrifices for the family. Then she left. By the second day, I was starting to panic. Kept hearing Raphael's voice upstairs. Kept hearing my father talking business with him. They were finalizing details like I'd already agreed. I started to realize they weren't going to let me out until I gave in. My father came down that night, slid some papers under the door. Marriage contract. Told me to read them over, that I'd be signing them tomorrow whether I wanted to or not. Said Raphael was being generous considering my behavior. That's when he said it. You're worth $2 million to this family and you will not ruin this deal. I sat in that dark basement realizing I'd never been a daughter to him. Just an asset. Something to trade. Property. It was Hayden who finally let me out after 48 hours. He looked terrified, said he couldn't take it anymore hearing me cry. Told me our father and Raphael had gone to the bank to set up the accounts for the business merger. Said I needed to run, that he'd give me a head start before telling them. But when I got upstairs, I saw the papers on the dining table. The marriage contract. Already signed. My father had forged my signature. That's when something broke inside me. I realized screaming and fighting wouldn't work. They'd just lock me up again. Maybe somewhere worse. So when they came back, I pretended to be defeated. Apologized to Raphael. Said I'd been overwhelmed. That I understood now. The relief on my father's face was disgusting. Raphael looked smug, like he'd won. My mother hugged me, whispered, "Thank you" in my ear like I'd done her a favor. Only Hayden looked sick about the whole thing. The wedding was set for 3 months later. Enough time for me to plan. Update. Those 3 months were the longest of my life. Every morning I'd wake up feeling like I couldn't breathe, knowing I was trapped in a house with people who saw me as something to be sold. Raphael started coming over almost every day, bringing me gifts. Always jewelry, expensive but with this possessive edge to them. Necklaces that felt like collars, bracelets that were too tight, watching me with those eyes while I pretended to be grateful. My skin crawled every time he touched me, putting his hand on my lower back, letting it linger just a bit too long. He'd talk about our future home, this mansion he owned outside the city where I'd be comfortable while he worked. Comfortable. Like a pet in a nice cage. My father treated the whole thing like a business transaction he'd successfully closed. Started talking about me in the third person when Raphael was around. She's always been good with numbers, or she knows how to entertain guests properly. Selling my features like I was a fucking product. One night, I heard him tell Raphael that I'd settle down once the wedding was done, and that he shouldn't worry about my temporary attitude problem. My mother tried to play both sides. would slip into my room at night with these sad eyes, telling me she understood how hard this was. Then, in the same breath, would show me wedding magazines. Talk about how Raphael could provide such a good life for me. When I asked her how she could do this, she just said marriage was about building a future, not silly things like love or attraction, that she'd learned to appreciate my father over time. That was when I realized she'd gone through something similar. Maybe not as extreme, but she'd been traded too. Hayden was the only one who seemed to see how fucked up it all was. He'd shoot me these looks during dinner when Raphael would say something particularly disgusting about training me to run his household. We started having these whispered conversations when no one was around. He was only 19, still dependent on our parents financially, scared of our father, but he wanted to help. I knew I needed to escape before the wedding, but it wasn't as simple as just running away. My father had frozen my bank accounts, called it protecting my future interests, took my passport and ID for safekeeping, while we got the marriage license paperwork ready. Raphael had hired a wedding planner who was clearly watching me, reporting back everything I did. I wasn't even allowed to go anywhere alone anymore. Always had to have my mother or the planner with me. I started small, told Raphael I wanted to prove I could be a good wife, asked to help with some of his business paperwork. He loved that, thought I was finally accepting my role, used it to get access to his contact information, learned his routines, figured out when he'd be unreachable, started pretending I was getting excited about the wedding, would deliberately bring up details just to get my father to leave the room to take business calls, gave me chances to search his office, found out my father was in serious financial trouble. His company was failing, had been for years. Raphael's merger wasn't just adding money, it was saving my father from complete bankruptcy. That's why he was so desperate, why he was willing to sell his daughter. $2 million wasn't just profit, it was survival. The worst part was the wedding dress shopping. Standing there in these white gowns while my mother and the wedding planner cried about how beautiful I looked. All I could think was how I was being dressed up for my own funeral. Raphael insisted on seeing photos of each dress, would text back his opinions like he had the right. The neckline should be lower, I want to see more skin, and my mother would just nod and ask for alterations. Every night I'd lock my bedroom door, push furniture against it, and cry silently into my pillow. The wedding invitations went out. People started calling to congratulate me. Old friends from high school messaging about how lucky I was to marry such a wealthy man. Nobody questioned the age gap. Nobody asked if I was okay with it. They just saw the money. Hayden was the one who helped me get my ID back, created this huge fight with my father as a distraction, while I snuck into his office and broke into his safe. Didn't get my passport, but at least had my driver's license. Started slowly collecting cash. Small amounts my mother wouldn't notice missing from her purse. Selling jewelry Raphael had given me to pawn shops 2 towns over when I was supposedly at dress fittings. Things got worse when Raphael decided he needed to prepare me for married life. Started having these private dinners where he'd quiz me on his preferences, tell me exactly how he liked his house run, what he expected from a wife. Told me when we were married, I wouldn't be returning to university, that educated women made poor mothers, that he expected children within the first year. Sat too close, touched my thigh under the table, ignored when I flinched away. One night he tried to kiss me, pushed me against the wall when I turned my face away, told me I needed to get used to it, that we'd be doing much more than kissing after the wedding. I had to force myself not to fight back, to just freeze instead of push him away. Couldn't risk him telling my father I was still resistant. Just stood there feeling his disgusting wet mouth on my neck, his hands gripping my waist too hard. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out they'd already decided where I would live, what I would wear, even what I would be allowed to eat. Overheard Raphael talking to my father about how he didn't want me getting fat after the wedding, how he'd have his housekeeper monitor my meals. They discussed me like I was a show dog that needed to maintain its appearance. That was when Hayden finally snapped. We were sitting in his room, me telling him what I'd overheard, and he just stood up and said, "Fuck this, we're getting you out." Said he had some money saved for college that he'd give me. Not much, but enough to get away. Enough to hide somewhere Raphael and my father couldn't find me. We made the plan in whispers late at night. Hayden would create a distraction the day before the wedding, something big enough that no one would immediately notice I was gone. I'd take a bus to the city, then another bus across state lines. Had a friend from university who'd let me stay with her without asking questions. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. What we didn't count on was my mother finding the bus ticket. She was cleaning my room, something she never did, and found it tucked inside a book. I came back from another horrible lunch with Raphael to find her sitting on my bed, ticket in hand, face white. I thought she'd run straight to my father. Instead, she just looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked, "Do you hate him that much?" Not my father. Raphael. Like that was the only reason I wouldn't want to marry a man old enough to be my father, who saw me as property to be controlled. I couldn't lie anymore. Told her yes, I hated him. Hated the way he looked at me, touched me, talked about me. Hated that my father had sold me. Hated that she had let it happen. Started crying. All the fear and disgust and rage finally pouring out. Told her I couldn't breathe when he was near me. Couldn't sleep knowing what was coming after the wedding. Thought for one moment she understood. She hugged me, stroked my hair like when I was little, whispered that she was sorry, then said, "But you'll learn to live with it." I did. That broke something in me. Realized she wasn't going to help. That in her mind, this was just how the world worked. Women were traded, used, controlled. They adapted. They survived by giving in. She didn't tell my father about the ticket, but she started watching me constantly. Wouldn't leave me alone with Hayden. Told the wedding planner to check my bags whenever we went out. My one potential escape route was gone. The night before the wedding rehearsal dinner, Raphael came over with papers. More contracts, business agreements between him and my father. Heard them talking in the study. Raphael saying he wanted everything finalized before the ceremony. My father agreeing, sounding relieved, grateful even. I stood outside that door listening to them discuss the terms of my sale. Raphael saying he'd transfer the first $1 million upon signing the marriage certificate. The second would come after I had proven myself a good wife for 6 months. They had metrics for this. Actual written criteria for how I would be evaluated. Obedience, availability, appearance, fertility. Went back to my room and threw up. Sat on the bathroom floor shaking, realizing I was out of time, out of options. In less than 48 hours, I would be legally bound to this man. Would be taken to his house where no one would hear me scream, where I would be trapped completely. That night, I made a new plan. A desperate one. If I couldn't escape, I'd have to make Raphael back out. Make him decide I wasn't worth the investment after all. The rehearsal dinner was at this expensive restaurant Raphael had rented out completely. All his business associates were there, people from my father's company, extended family, who looked at me with either envy or pity. I sat next to Raphael at the main table, his hand constantly on my knee under the tablecloth, squeezing whenever I shifted away. Waited until everyone was there, until all eyes were on us. Raphael stood to make a toast, talking about how excited he was to welcome me into his life, how grateful he was to my father for entrusting him with his greatest treasure. That's when I stood up, looked around at all those faces and said, in the clearest voice I'd ever managed, "I need everyone to know that I'm being forced into this marriage, that my father locked me in our basement for 2 days when I refused Raphael's proposal, that he forged my signature on the marriage contract, that Raphael is paying him $2 million to marry me against my will." The room went completely silent. Raphael's face twisted into something terrifying. My father half rose from his chair, face purple with rage. But I kept going, told them everything. How Raphael talked about training me, the criteria for being a good wife, how they'd taken my documents, controlled my movements, planned out every aspect of my future without my consent. Finished by looking directly at Raphael's business partners and saying, "Is this really the kind of man you want to be associated with? Someone who has to buy a wife, who locks up women who say no to him?" My father was across the room in seconds, grabbing my arm so hard it bruised instantly, hissing that I needed to shut my fucking mouth. Raphael was trying to laugh it off, telling everyone I was emotional about the wedding, had cold feet, but I could see it in people's faces. The shock, the discomfort. Some of the women looked physically ill. One of Raphael's older colleagues was staring at him with undisguised disgust. My father dragged me out of the restaurant, practically threw me into the car. The entire ride home he didn't speak, just this terrible silence that terrified me more than his yelling ever had. My mother was crying. Hayden looked both proud and scared out of his mind. When we got home, my father grabbed me by the hair, dragged me toward the basement door, screaming that I'd ruined everything, that I'd destroyed our family, that I was nothing but an ungrateful whore who'd rather destroy her family than do her duty. Hayden tried to stop him, actually tackled him to the ground. They fought while I scrambled away, ran to my room, locked the door. Could hear them still fighting, furniture breaking, my mother screaming for them to stop. Sat with my back against the door, heart pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. Didn't know what would happen now. Didn't know if my plan had worked or if I'd just made everything infinitely worse. All I knew was that I couldn't take back what I'd done, couldn't unsay those words. My phone started blowing up. Texts from Raphael, each one more threatening than the last. Calling me a lying bitch, saying I would regret humiliating him, that no one made a fool of him and got away with it, that he would make sure I had nothing and no one when he was done with me. Then my father started pounding on my door. I could hear the wood splintering as he threw his weight against it, screaming that he would kill me himself before he let me ruin everything he'd worked for. Last update. I spent that night barricaded in my room, listening to my father rage through the house. He'd stopped trying to break down my door after Hayden called the police, but I could hear him downstairs, smashing things, screaming about ungrateful children and family loyalty. My phone kept buzzing with texts from Raphael, threats mixed with bizarre attempts to salvage the situation. One minute he was saying he'd destroy me, the next offering to forgive me if I apologized publicly, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. The police came, talked to everyone. My father somehow pulled himself together, told them it was just a family disagreement about wedding stress. They didn't even ask to speak to me separately, just accepted his explanation and left. Classic useless cops. Saw a nice house in a good neighborhood and assumed nothing truly bad could happen here. Hayden slept on the floor outside my door that night. Said he wasn't going to let anyone get to me. I could hear my mother crying in her bedroom, my father's voice rising and falling as he alternated between threatening her and pleading with her to fix this mess. Morning came and the house was eerily quiet. I was afraid to come out, but eventually hunger and the need for a bathroom that wasn't attached to my bedroom forced me to unlock the door. Found Hayden still there, bleary-eyed but determined. He walked with me downstairs, keeping himself between me and any potential threat. The house looked like a hurricane had hit it. Broken glass everywhere, pictures knocked off walls, furniture overturned, but no sign of my parents. Hayden said they'd left early, heard the car pull out around 5 a.m. Neither of us knew where they'd gone, but I had a sickening feeling it involved Raphael. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I needed to know what was happening. Called my mother. No answer. My father. Straight to voicemail. Finally texted a cousin who was supposed to be in the wedding party. She responded immediately. The wedding was still on. My parents were telling everyone I'd had a nervous breakdown, but would be better in time for the ceremony. They were lying to everyone, spinning a story where I was mentally unstable rather than being sold like property. Felt like I was going to pass out. Hayden made me sit down, brought me water, kept saying we'd figure this out, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. We were just kids, really. Me at 21, him at 19. What could we possibly do against the full force of our father's determination? That's when Raphael called. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I needed to know what he was planning. Told me he'd spoken with my father, that they'd come to an understanding about my outburst. Said he was still willing to go through with the wedding, because he understood that women sometimes get emotional. Then his voice changed, got harder. Said if I didn't show up tomorrow, properly apologetic and ready to be a good wife, he would make sure my father lost everything. Would make sure Hayden lost his college fund, his future. Said he had enough influence to destroy our entire family. Spent the next hours in a panic, trying to figure out what to do. Couldn't run, had nowhere to go, no money, and now Raphael would be watching for that. Couldn't stay. My father would literally drag me to that altar if he had to. Felt completely trapped. Hayden and I were still trying to come up with a plan when our parents came home. My father looked different, not raging anymore, but something colder, more calculated. My mother wouldn't look at me at all. They sat us down in what was left of the living room, and my father explained the new arrangement. The wedding would proceed as planned. Raphael had generously agreed to overlook my emotional outburst on the condition that I make a public statement claiming I'd been under stress and hadn't meant what I said. I would apologize to his business associates. I would be a model wife. In exchange, Raphael would still pay the $2 million, and our family business would be saved. If I refused, Raphael would not only withdraw his offer, but would use his connections to ensure my father's business failed completely. Would make sure no bank would ever loan to us again. Would ruin Hayden's chances at any decent job in the future. My father delivered this like he was reading a business proposal, not describing the sale of his daughter's life. I looked at my mother, begging her with my eyes to help me. She just stared at the floor and whispered that sometimes sacrifices had to be made for family, that I needed to be strong, that I would adjust eventually. That's when I truly understood. There was no escape. No help coming. No one who would stand up for me except Hayden, who was as trapped as I was. Felt something crack inside me. Not breaking, but hardening. Realized that if I was going to survive this, I needed to stop hoping for rescue and start thinking differently. Told my father I needed time to think. He looked suspicious but said I had until morning to come to my senses. Warned me not to try running again. Said Raphael had hired people to watch the house to make sure his investment was secure. Back in my room, I sat on my bed staring at the wall for hours, thinking about the life ahead of me. Being owned by Raphael, bearing his children, slowly dying inside while everyone pretended it was normal. Couldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. But couldn't see a way out that didn't destroy everyone else I cared about too. Hayden came in around midnight. Sat beside me. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he asked if I remembered when we were kids and would make escape plans for zombie apocalypses or alien invasions. How we always promised we'd stick together no matter what. Started crying then. Said he couldn't watch this happen to me. That he'd rather give up his future than see me sacrificed. That's when the idea came. Told Hayden we needed to find leverage. Something that would make Raphael back off without destroying our family in the process. If this was a business deal to them, we needed to make it a bad investment. Spent the night digging through everything we could find. My father's business files. Old emails. Financial records Hayden could access through the family computer. Looking for anything we could use. Found plenty of evidence of my father's financial troubles, but nothing that would help against Raphael. Morning came too quickly. Could hear my parents moving around downstairs, my mother calling up that it was time to start getting ready. The wedding planner would be arriving soon to help me dress, do my hair, make sure I looked perfect for my sale. That's when Hayden found it. An old email thread buried in my father's archive. Conversations between him and Raphael going back 3 years. Planning this. Planning my marriage since I was 18. Discussing how to prepare me for the idea. Raphael talking about how he'd had his eye on me since I was 16, attending my father's company picnic. My father responding with suggestions on how to maximize the arrangement. Never once discussing what I might want. just calculating the best time to cash in on their investment. Felt physically sick reading it. Rafael had been watching me, waiting since I was a minor. Had been planning with my father while I was still legally a child. Took screenshots of everything, sent them to my email, to Hayden's email, to a new account I created just for backup. Went downstairs then, found my parents, and told them I needed to speak to Rafael before the ceremony. Needed to apologize properly in private. My father looked relieved, thought I'd given in, called Rafael immediately to arrange it. Rafael arrived looking smug, like he'd won. My father left us alone in the study, the final courtesy before delivering me to my new owner. As soon as the door closed, Rafael's facade dropped. Told me he was going to make me pay for every second of embarrassment I'd caused him. That once we were married, I'd learn exactly what happened to disobedient wives. I just looked at him calmly and showed him the emails. Watched his face change as he realized what I had. Told him if he didn't walk away from this wedding, from our family completely, these would go to every business associate he had. To the press. To anyone who might be interested in knowing he'd been planning to acquire a teenage girl through her father. Might not be technically illegal since nothing happened while I was underage, but it would destroy his reputation. No one would do business with him again. He tried to grab my phone. I stepped back, told him it was already backed up in multiple places. That Hayden had copies too, with instructions on what to do if anything happened to me. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Demanded he call off the wedding, return any contracts my father had signed, walk away completely. He tried to argue, to threaten, but I just kept my finger hovering over the send button on an email addressed to his entire contact list. Finally, he broke. Agreed to everything. Watched him leave. Still couldn't believe it had worked. My father came in moments later, face ashen. Rafael had told him everything was off. No merger, no money, no wedding. He lost it. Started screaming at me, saying I'd destroyed our family, asking what I'd done, what I'd said to make Rafael back out. I just looked at him. This man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped with my homework and then tried to sell me like livestock, and felt nothing but pity. Told him I knew about the emails, knew he'd been planning this for years, saw the shock on his face, then the calculation as he tried to figure out how to spin this, how to justify it. Cut him off before he could start. Told him he had a choice to make. He could let me go, back to university, to my own life, or I could send those emails to everyone. Could destroy his reputation the way he'd nearly destroyed my life. My mother was crying in the doorway, Hayden standing behind her. My father looked at them, then back at me, asked why I was doing this to him, like I was the one hurting him, like he was the victim here. That's when my mother finally found her voice. Told him enough was enough, that she'd stood by while he gambled away their future, while he made bad business decisions, while he tried to solve his problems by selling their daughter. But she wouldn't watch him blame me for his failures. The next few hours were a blur, calls canceling the wedding, guests being told there was a family emergency, Rafael's things being removed from our house. My father locked himself in his study, wouldn't speak to any of us. My mother moved silently through the house, looking both relieved and terrified about what would happen next. That night, I packed my things, couldn't stay there anymore. Hayden helped me load my car, made me promise to call when I reached my friend's place, hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. My mother stood in the driveway watching, tears streaming down her face, said she was sorry, that she should have protected me, that she'd been weak. I couldn't forgive her yet, but told her maybe someday. My father never came out to say goodbye. Could see him watching from his study window as I drove away. Don't know if he was angry, ashamed, or just calculating his next move. Didn't care anymore. It's been 6 months since then. I'm back at university, finishing my degree. My father's company eventually failed. Turned out Rafael made sure of that. His final act of revenge. My parents had to sell the house, move to something smaller. My mother calls sometimes, trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. My father never does. Hayden moved in with me, transferred to a college nearby. Says he couldn't stay in that house after everything that happened. Still have the screenshots, just in case Rafael ever decides to try again. But mostly, I try to focus on building a life that belongs only to me.